Okay, here we are, another podcast.
We are officially in session.
We're in session. Jimmy D and the Wolf. So today I thought that I would continue on a thing that we've been talking about before, where we were talking about the life expectancy and some of the cultural things of some other countries and benchmarking the U.S. versus other countries. That was something we talked about either the last podcast or the one before. And as some of you may know, I lived in Japan for 2 years, and then I spent 15 years building a business exporting to Japan. And one time, my Japanese was really good, really good. I negotiated contracts with people that didn't speak English. Negotiated them in Japanese. And so I know have a lot of experience with the Japanese culture, and I love it. It's fascinating. It is so different than Western culture. And it's so deep and such a long history. And I personally feel that it would not be a bad thing if every American was forced to do compulsory service of teaching English, let's say, in a foreign country for 1 year when they became 18 or 20, whatever years. So impactful, because you learn so much about other cultures. You learn to respect other cultures, and you learn about our place in the world and how other people view us. And I want to tell first a joke, and then I want to tell a story. Is that okay, Jimmy?
Absolutely.
Okay. The joke was when I worked for the Japanese in New York City, and there was only two of us professionals, engineers, and the rest of them were all Japanese. And they would tell this joke, and even other nationalities, sometimes Europeans would be there, and they all would laugh. And it's just kind of indicative of how Americans are perceived and sometimes how we view things. So the story goes like this. There's a Titanic or a boat out in the middle of the ocean, and it's going down. And so there's only enough lifeboats for the women and children. So the captain has to convince, and there's a number of nationalities there, has to convince the men to jump overboard, jump off the boat. And so there's some Germans there, and to the Germans they say, "You will jump off," and the Germans jump off. To the Brits, the UK, they say, "Oh, it's a game. It's a sport. We're all going to jump off the boat." And all the Brits say, "Yay, a sport, let's do it." To the Japanese, they say, "It's a group thing. We're all going to do it together. Let's jump off." And all the Japanese men jump off. And to the Americans, they say, "Go ahead and jump. It's okay. You're insured." Or a variation would be, "Oh, you can sue."
Exactly. Everybody sues over everything.
So, because insurance and being sued is kind of somewhat in the same category. And there are other ways. There have been societies that have been around a lot longer than ours.
Sure.
And I'm a firm believer that we can learn a lot from other societies.
Sustaining, we're the newest really big country.
And we've only been around about 230 years.
Yeah, people tend to lose sight of that,
These cultures that have been around thousands of years,
Sure. Yeah, and Americans are quickly swayed to kind of discredit other cultures. Oftentimes our opinions of other cultures are easily swayed. And I remember when the whole freedom fries thing came out, when so many people were mad about the French, and we're not even going to call them French fries.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't have a sense of history, right now we're at our peak. I mean,
yes.
Some say we're in decline, but we are the most powerful, the largest economy in the world, and we have, a soft power, cultural power, we have military power, and it's easy to get arrogant over that.
Sure.
But when you study history and you see there have been a number of countries who have had their time in the sun. Portugal now is a very poor country, and small country. But at one time, Portugal ruled the sea, and they had colonies all over the world. Spain,
Sure.
Spain colonized for brutally colonized South America.
And the Dutch were super powerful.
The Dutch dominated the 17th century. That was the Dutch century, the West Indies Trading Company. The Dutch were just the most powerful country in the world. And you go further back, the Mongolians.
Yes,
the Mongolians
absolutely.
very proud. Now it's there's coming back. My sister and brother-in-law were missionaries in Mongolia, and I traveled there. And the Great Wall of China was built to try to keep the Mongolians out, but unfortunately it didn't succeed. And there was a period of time, the China history is divided into dynasties. And there's a dynasty that is when the Mongolians, when Kublai Khan and Genghis Khan ruled China. I don't recall which dynasty that is called, but it's about 1200 AD. And the Chinese were so powerful. I mean, they invented writing paper. They had such an empire. In fact, there's some evidence that they traveled the world and discovered America. There's a book called 1491, I think it is, and it talks about how Chinese would set sail and were gone for 3 years, and there's evidence that they were set sail, and when they discovered so much of the world, and when they came back, there was a change of power, and they were forced to burn all their boats and everything that they had learned, and so that was almost lost to history. But that's a fascinating book. I think I'll put it in the comments. I think it's 1491, which is 1 year before 1492, which was supposedly when Columbus discovered America. But
there's also evidence that they had thriving, very structured, advanced societies in China when Western Europeans were essentially still living in caves.
Yeah. So you know, to me, I'm a person to take a step back. And to
try to look at the whole thing.
Look at the whole thing and look at the span of history. It's been our century.
200 years is a blip, man.
200 is a blip, just an absolute blip.
Yeah.
And even Greece. Greece is struggling so badly. They had the big crisis. But at one time, Alexander's time, they were a world.
Yeah, it's a very cyclical.
Power.
It's a cyclical thing.
It's a cyclical thing.
It comes and it goes. And in my mind, I love America. I love the whole idea behind it. But in my mind, our success in many ways is still that sort of ripple effect from the prospering from World War II. There were lots of things that happened that kind of put us, the United States was nothing like what it is until World War II.
Absolutely.
And there's still a kind of understandable hard feelings between, Russia and the United States of America, because as Americans, and even in school, we're taught, well, we won World War II.
And that is such BS.
We stepped in and bam, we stopped the Nazis.
Most people don't realize that there were, I think, 6 landing sites on Normandy.
Yeah.
We only had 2 of them.
So many Russians died and so few.
Oh, yeah. On the eastern.
I'm not making light of the Americans that died fighting in that war, because I'm not trying to make light of that. But there were so many Russians lost their lives.
Russians lost their lives in World War II.
It's astronomical. That's an astronomical figure.
We lost 300,000, I think it was. I had all these numbers memorized and now a little vague, but the Soviets lost 28 million people.
And England didn't lose anywhere close to.
Well, they lost a lot more than we did.
They lost more than we did, but nothing close to.
Here's the stat that blows my mind. It's often people, some people have said, oh, all the French are good at is waving their white flag. And here's something that was driven home to me when I was in Paris and I went to the Museum of War. It was fascinating. They had actual Nazi flags that were from World War. Fascinating stuff. All the way back to the armor, and there would be a helmet, the night days, the armor that they used to wear on the horses,
Knights of the Templar.
No, I mean the actual knights, you know,
knights.
with the
Oh,
metal,
gotcha.
you know, the from the medieval time. And there was one, you know, there'd be a few of them with like a hole in it. And it was like, that's the last time that guy wore that one, you know, because the sword.
It's when we retired his suit.
Anyway, so in World War I, most of it was fought on French's ground, and it was just, you know, 1 meter or 10 feet at a time. It was trench warfare. And
with horses and foot soldiers, right?
Yes, yeah.
These aren't tanks zipping around or
No, there weren't. And France lost. Now France is a country of a population of about 50 million today, and I'm sure it was less then at that time, maybe 30. Let's say 35 million people. They had 8 million catastrophes, 4 million casualties. 4 million deaths and 4 million wounded.
Wow.
8 million people. We lost 300,000 in World War II. Could you imagine? I don't care. You know, and only 20 years later. So World War I happened, ended. Armistice was like 1919. 1939, when Hitler started invading, it was only 20 years. That'd be like 2000 from now.
Yeah.
From 2000 to 2020.
That's not very long.
That's not very long. And so the memory of that, no, they didn't have any heart. They didn't have the manpower. They didn't have the heart to fight that.
But it's interesting that, you know, many Americans depict the French that way of like waving the white flag when they were just total warriors, man. Throughout history, they were just total warriors all the way.
Without them, we wouldn't have won the revolution.
We wouldn't have the country to begin with. And it's no wonder they don't really like us.
You know, so, but you know, just think of 8 million people, of a country with roughly less than 50 million people, and you have 8 million casualties. We don't know what that is.
Sure.
We've never lost a tenth of that many.
Sure.
300,000 we thought was a lot in World War II. In World War I, we lost even less than that. The worst that we've had, we lost 50,000 in Vietnam. That's horrible, but 50,000. How does 50,000 compare?
One is horrible. Yeah,
one is horrible.
When you
but how does 50,000 compare?
Numbers.
How does 50,000 compare to 4 million deaths in a war? Yeah. That's going to decimate a country. And Soviet Union lost 28 million.
Unbelievable. And then we claimed the victory.
Yeah.
Where it should have been this big unified thing. If it was a world war, you know, we fought together. We're with you.
But what it made it happen was the fact that we were able to pump out all of the machines that you needed, the boats and the tanks and the manufacturing power.
We had the manufacturing.
We were that part turned the war. Because we were able to continue. We could out-manufacture anyone. We had the manufacturing resources, and that was true. We girded our loins, and we wound up to produce, and we just continued to produce more and more. And that was the Axis could not. They didn't have that. They could not. So even if it had lasted longer, if it had been a war of attrition, we would have won out because of that. Or the Allies would have won out because. Them. But if Hitler had taken England, and I've read that he
didn't want to because he was convinced that the Brits would eventually kind of side with him because he was convinced they were the same.
If he had taken England, it might have been a different story. Or if he wouldn't, I know now it's revisionist history. And that they're saying that Hitler was a socialist, but he hated socialism and communism.
Yes,
hated it, and he viewed himself as the opposite.
He was a nationalist.
He was a nationalist, and if he hadn't hated communism so much, maybe he would have sided with the Soviets.
Yeah,
and then they would have won.
Lots of interesting things that kind of swayed it.
Because it was an uneasy truce between the Western democracies and the Soviets. I mean, we joined together, but. Even just after it was over, Patton said, "Well, why don't we just fight the Soviets now? Because we're going to have to fight them eventually."
Yeah, he wanted to keep going.
He wanted to keep going. So we were on the same side, but it wasn't like we were buds.
There's some historians that believe that if the Japanese would have attacked Russia on the other side, that the Axis powers would have won World War II handily. Many historians believe that. Because Japan had fought with Russia not that long before that.
Yeah, the Russia, Japan, and they won it.
Yeah.
They beat Russia in like 1890 something.
So if we don't get involved kind of when we did, maybe the whole thing looks different. I don't know. It's fascinating that the whole thing shaped the world. And we're still riding that wave as a country. We're still reaping the benefits of World War II.
Right.
Because on the technological front, I mean, we got the German scientists after that, and most of the technology that we use today was a result of World War II. If it wasn't something that we invented or the Brits invented because of the war effort, it was something the Germans invented.
Another thing, too, a whole bunch of German scientists left Germany because they didn't agree with Hitler and came with us.
Sure.
We couldn't have come up with the Manhattan Project. Wouldn't have worked. It was all German scientists that brought what they had with them.
Well, that's the thing, you know. I mean, that's, in my mind, that's what makes us still a great country. There's so many issues. We talked about our health care and kind of a limited way of thinking amongst many people in our country. But that is the whole beauty of it, and what, in my mind, still makes us the greatest country of the world, because we have every kind of people here, you know. And it's like the code breakers, the Native American code breakers in World War II. Little variables like that. It's sad to see the whole idea behind it kind of start to lose momentum of welcoming everybody in. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, those. If you listen to this and you start saying that we hate America and we're
no, I'm a patriot.
I mean, I'm a patriot. I love my country.
I love my country.
I die for my country. But you know, I also realize we have faults and we're not perfect. Anyway, so I want to talk about this. I want to tell a story, and it's called the 47 Ronin. And some listeners may know this story. This is a true story based in Japanese culture, and it
embodies.
Thank you. The mores of the samurai code, and the samurai code has this mysterious and very elegant and very high level of morality that's associated with it. A code of practice. For example, if two samurais fight each other in a duel, and one samurai is able to kill the other samurai, he then has a moment of silence and respect over that samurai's body because he respected his opponent, you know, and
to honor
him. And so this is a true story that happened in 1701. Now, for 300 years, during that time until about 1850, so it would have been 1550 roughly. Don't email me and say that I'm off by a few years, but I'm
missed it by that much.
It's magnitudes correctly. 300 years, Japan was a closed country, did not have any communication with the outside world. That was by design, and that broke in about 1855 when I think it was an American ship docked in a port in southern Japan and was allowed to start trading with the Japanese. So they slowly realized how far they were behind. They were shut off from the world for 300 years. I mean, you didn't have internet, you didn't have telephones, they did at that time didn't exist, and they started to modernize, and they became actually the darling of the Western world. People were fascinated by this culture, and rabbit trail now. But my favorite painter in the entire world is Vincent van Gogh, and so 1855. So just a few years later, they had these world fairs, world exhibition, and the Eiffel Tower was built for one of those world fairs, and one of those events. The World Fair in Paris, and that's where Van Gogh was living at the time. Even though he's Dutch, he was living in France. And the ukiyo-e, which are woodblock prints, was an inexpensive way to convey Japanese art, and it's radically different than Western art. And Van Gogh became obsessed with ukiyo-e prints, and he had over 500 of these. They weren't that expensive. because they're woodblock prints. It's back like you made a mold and you kept printing. It's a primitive press, printing press with the colors and everything, and you can make. And he had, I think, 550 of these woodblock prints all tacked up in his studio, and he studied them. And that's one reason why his artwork is so different and so radical and so jarring, because he went to it. He took inspiration from a different path that none of the other, the other
and that stuff had like depth perception.
Depth perception. It's a lot of different things. I was at the Van Gogh Museum and talk about I've forgotten a lot of it, but and I brought books. We can look at them later that talked all about this. And one of them was a diagonal horizon that went from bottom lower right to upper left, and you can see that in the ukiyo-e's, and you can see that in a lot of Van Gogh's paintings. Anyway, so that coincided with when they opened up their society. So during this period when the samurais were succeeding, during these 300 years, this is when the samurai culture was happening. And it was a feudal system where you had you'd call him a lord, like they had in England, and would have a certain amount of land. And then the samurais would report to the lord, and they would be under that lord's jurisdiction, and he would pay them and take care of them, and that was a certain territory. And it was called the Edo period. And Tokugawa were the people that were in power, and they were very, very smart. And they one of the things Japan is big on ceremony, and one of the things they instituted was every 2 years, all the lords would have to make a journey to Tokyo, which is where headquarters was, where the capital was, the Edo capital, and it was an entire procession, and it cost a lot of money. You had to get fine clothes. You had to get a carriage that would carry you. It was a big to-do, and it cost a lot of money. And it was one way of keeping them down so that they didn't have money and time to stage an uprising. Tokugawas were brilliant if you study them, because they stayed in power, the family, for 300 years, the entire Edo time period. Anyway, so it was this requirement that they had to go. And there was a young lord who had never done this, and he and two other lords were inexperienced, had never done this procession to pay tribute, and they were supposed to be advised by this experienced guy sent from the court in Edo and Tokyo. And there was, Japan is a gift-giving society, reciprocity. We've talked about this before. And apparently this particular lord gave a gift, but it was an inferior, not received well. The other two that were being trained by him gave gifts that he received and thought were adequate. So he gave the incorrect advice to this lord. He literally misdirected him and told him the wrong things to do to prepare for this event. And when he gets to the castle and he realizes that he is embarrassingly in the wrong, he gets angry and he attacks the advisor, who was there, of course, and starts to attack him, and the advisor escapes. And he had a sword, I think, or a knife. They had a sword, which was for offensive, and then they would carry a knife in their belt, which was a short knife, and the only purpose for that was to commit ceremonial suicide. Seppuku. Well, seppuku is the honorific way of saying it. Harikari, but the Japanese, when I would use that term, actually is pronounced harakiri, the way it's spelled. But when I first started working with the Japanese, they said, no, it's actually seppuku, which is a more honor. It gives it honor but yeah, that's the phrase we're familiar with it. But seppuku, and you're supposed to cut like this with that knife, disembowel yourself. Has to be a horrible way to die. Anyway, ceremonial suicide. So, but if you follow the samurai code, when you're ordered to commit seppuku, you do it. And I think his name was Asano. Asano tried to attack this advisor, and the advisor ran away from him and hid. And he was so angry, and the shogun, who was the leader, the president of the country, or the king of the country, whatever you want to say, the shogun, he said, "You have committed an offense. You have come to the castle, and you have attacked with a knife. You have to commit ceremonial seppuku." And he did, because Asano committed. So now, and the shogun was very angry, and he said, the territory that is owned by Asano will be, I'm going to take that back. And so all of the samurai that were under Asano now were what's called Ronin. And there have been a lot of movies made, 47 Ronin. There have been a recent movie, so maybe you've seen this, covering this story, because it's such a fascinating story. And so now Ronin means you're a samurai without a lord. So basically you don't have a purpose. And everyone was thinking they're going to try to revenge their master. What they did is they got together and they said, some of them said, let's commit seppuku on the castle gate because we don't have a home now. And the leader of them said, okay, how many of you are in and how want to do revenge, and how many of you don't? And there were more than 47, but 47 said, we will revenge our master. And he said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, because people are watching us, we're going to disappear in society. We're going to be drunkards. We're going to be obviously look like we've just lost it. And we're going to act like this for at least 1 year. And so they did. And people began to watch them for the first few months. And they're like in the taverns drinking and just really look like they've completely lost it. And so started to think that, okay, he's safe. About 1 year later, when the suspicion was down, they went and they found him and they killed him, and they revenged against their master, and they took his head and they put it on a pike in front of the gate of what used to be their master's property. Well, Tokugawa was very angry because this was against his rules, and he ordered all 47 of them to commit seppuku, and they did. But they had their honor, and they had revenged their master. That's the story of the 47 Ronin.
Wow. That's a heavy level of commitment.
Heavy level.
You can't even get American musicians to show up to band practice. These guys are killing themselves. These guys are killing themselves over their master. Wow. It's fascinating, man.
Samurai code, man. I mean, now, actual historians say the samurai code was honored more in the breach than in actually honoring it. I mean, it was this code that's supposed to be here, but was it followed to that level? Most of the time, if you're going to be honest and actually look at the facts,
yeah,
really.
You're probably going to try to stab the other guy before you stick it in your stomach. Yeah. You know, I mean, when it comes down to brass tacks, I bet a lot of those guys, it may have looked like they disemboweled themselves, but they didn't have forensics back then. I don't care what the situation is. I'm stabbing the other dude, no matter what it is. Before I'm putting the knife in myself. I think that's just the human condition, man. They like to say that they all did it to themselves. I don't know.
You know, and who knows? I mean, it became folklore. You know, I mean,
Sure.
it became.
And those stories, they grow. And,
yes, they do.
Time,
you know, it's like our story. You know, Paul Revere, one is by land, two is by sea. There's people that are saying he never actually did a ride. You know, but it's part of our culture. It's part of our. You know, it's our. We embrace it. And
and those stories get ingrained, and then you begin to wonder what's. Now more than ever, you know what I mean, with social media and things like that, you hear stories all the time, and now you have to look at it and go, well, is this legit? And you almost have to look at something. It's almost like you pick your source. What source is reputable? And so, I mean, the stories that have hung through the years, I mean, we're all reading stories when we're little kids about dragons and wizards, and it's interesting thing about our culture especially is, like, there's a BS meter in every American, because when you're little, it's there's the Tooth Fairy, and then the Easter Bunny, and the Santa Claus,
Sure.
and you know, by the time you're like 12, you're kind of looking at everybody like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's all made up. The whole thing's made up. But it's interesting because everything that happens now, you have so many people that just instantly assume the worst. It's like this whole frenzy. I can't even look at social media right now because it's insane, dude. It is insane.
It is insane.
There are people just, this whole thing that we're experiencing now, we're at the top end of the whole COVID-19 thing, coronavirus thing in the States. And, dude, it's everything from conspiracies that...
Well, you know,
the
they said,
Chinese government made it up to the American government, made it up to its population control. They're trying to get rid of the old folks so they don't have to pay Social Security. They're trying to get rid of Trump to where they're trying to make sure Trump stays. There's every possible theory. And it's just like, it's mind-numbing, man. You can't even look at it because everybody on there is an expert now, and we're hearing from everybody except for the people that we need to be hearing from, who are the actual experts.
Well, we will survive it.
Yeah.
I'm personally hoping that we will learn from it.
Yeah, bring people closer together, man.
Hope,
you know,
we have some, and this is not pointing fingers. Our healthcare system. We've talked about healthcare in the last couple of, and not pointing fingers. I mean, the people that work in the healthcare system.
Oh, they're heroes.
They're heroes.
Absolutely.
It's like
and they're getting ready to go through it, man. You know, right
like
now.
my doctor said, he said, you know, healthcare, and then there's the healthcare business.
Yeah.
Those are two different things.
Sure.
And the actual I love my doctor. And nurses, I mean, they're amazing.
Absolutely.
And the medical professionals. But you know, the way we're aggregated, the system is
so much pressure on them.
Yeah, and we don't.
And so much stress on them.
We can improve. We can be better.
Yeah. And I think, you know, maybe this is maybe we come out the other side of this thing with a stronger sense of community, a stronger sense of country, and we realize the improvements that need to be made, and people accept it for what it is. That, you know, we could do better. We can do a lot better. With not a whole ton it's not like we have to overhaul the whole country or anything. There's a handful of improvements that we can make to improve the quality of life for everybody as a whole. And what that is, I'm a hill jack guitar player from Indiana. I don't know what those answers are, but I know
hill jack.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I mean, that's a part of the country I'm from. Nothing against the people
let's write a song
from there, but it is what it is.
I'm a hill jack guitar player
Yeah.
from. Yeah, okay. It actually sounds better if you said I'm a hill jack guitar player from Kentucky.
Yeah.
But you're not from Kentucky.
I've lived there.
Indiana. That's hard to sing. I'm a hill jack guitar player from Indiana.
Indiana just doesn't roll off the tongue.
No, it doesn't. But Kentucky does.
Well, you know, Madison is so country that the rest of the state doesn't even claim it. They call it Kentuckiana.
Really?
Yeah, they don't really claim us. It's funny. It's funny because geographically, like, you go all the way from the coast. You know, you can drive all the way from Florida or Georgia or Alabama all the way up to southern Indiana, where we're at. And topographically, it's all very similar. You know, there's changes in the terrain, and there's lots and lots of trees and lots of hills and sites. And it's almost as if as soon as you get north of that part, it's just flat, dude. There's nothing for a very long time, the rest of the state of Indiana. So we're more considered like part of Kentucky, I guess. I mean, it is in the state of Indiana, but it's Kentucky. It's the Kentuckiana area because it's very hilly, and it's lots of, you know, traditionally there's lots of, I guess, Irish people, Scottish people, things of that nature.
So, okay, so how did Indiana become a state? What number, do you know what number? Or?
Oh, man. 17th, maybe 17th. I would have to Google that, Tim. 16th, 17th, somewhere around there. Man, I should know that, but I don't. off the top of my head. I think they turned Indiana into its actual own state when the Jackson 5 became famous. Sometime in the 70s. Like, where are they from? It's not Chicago. It's just east of Chicago. Indiana's holding it down, man. But it's like after you get north of that part of the country, you get to drive about 5.5 hours, and it's just flat.
Was it a territory first? Do you know? Okay, I'll tell you what I know of where I was born and raised, South Dakota.
I think it was the Ohio Territory.
Ohio Territory, probably.
It was the Ohio Territory. And that part was mostly Shawnee Indians, I believe, the part where I live.
So they said, man, we got so many Indians here, we're just going to call this state
Indiana. Indiana. It was Tecumseh's War. Once they got rid of Tecumseh, I think that was essentially when Indiana became a state, because they were, of course, pushing the natives west at that point. Sure.
Well, South Dakota was Dakota Territory, North and South Dakota. And then it was Dakota Territory for a while. And then 1876, 1875, 1870, in there, we became a state, 1870s. And we are, okay, there were 48 before we got Hawaii and Alaska. And I think there was one after us. It might have been Montana or Wyoming. So I believe we're 46 and 7, or else 45 and 6, in that range. One of the last states. South Dakota and North Dakota, same time. And it should have been East Dakota and West Dakota.
Right.
Because eastern South Dakota and eastern North Dakota have a lot more in common than eastern South Dakota and western South Dakota. And the same thing, western North Dakota is a lot like western South Dakota.
That's where the Sioux, or the Lakotas.
That's where the Sioux, the proud Sioux, yeah.
They never really drove them out, you know what I mean? They should be proud.
Well, Wounded Knee, one of the worst chapters in the history of our country, was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It was a massacre at Wounded Knee. Wounded Knee is in South Dakota, where they massacred men, women, children, just massacred them. And then, what was that, 1890, roughly, time frame?
Man, that was not that long ago.
Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And then Custer, Last Stand, started in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Custer was an arrogant young general. Sure. And, the Black Hills of South Dakota, Pahasapa, they called it, which was their holy ground. They viewed that as being holy. The Black Hills of South Dakota are absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. I mean, they're more like mountains, small mountains, but they call them the Black Hills. That's where Mount Rushmore is. I don't know if you knew that.
Sure.
And that's where Custer's last stand was. He started the chase, and the Sioux set up an ambush, and he thought he was chasing them, but they were literally drawing him into a trap. And the Little Bighorn is in Montana or Wyoming. Little Bighorn, it's in Montana, Wyoming. One of the two states to the west of South Dakota are Montana, Wyoming, and pretty sure it's Wyoming. And that's where they turned around and caught him and just massacred his entire. Nobody survived, I believe. They just massacred him. They drew him into a trap, and Custer thought it was a hot shot. He was a young general that was rising up the ranks.
And events like this in the mind of the average American, that happened 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. And as far as we were discussing it, we're a 200-year-old country basically. We're a blip on the map, and in many Americans' minds, you know, they were massacring natives. Oh, that was 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago.
1890.
Or slavery was 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago. That's not a fresh wound. That was forever ago. It's amazing how our timeline is so compressed. As a nation, there's been so many events and so much still kind of, you know, so many fresh wounds still existing. And it's just fascinating, man. A lot has happened really quickly, and it's changing now before our eyes. What we're experiencing now is going to be, hopefully the thing goes away quick. You know, I don't know, but it just has a feeling about it like it's going to be a little bit of a marathon, and it's going to test quite a few things.
Well, I mean, there's so many articles on it, but, you know, supposedly the people that, the people who are in danger are elderly people and people who have autoimmune issues.
Yes. And
diabetic, perhaps.
Yes.
And obese.
39% of Americans are obese.
And it's got a 3% fatality rate?
Yes, but that could be much higher in the States, you know, because of the obesity thing.
But if you look at, I saw a chart today, and it was like, gave age ranges from like 1 to 5, or 0 to 5, and 5 to 10, and then on up. Yeah. And it's almost infinitesimal until you get up to like 65 or 70, and then it starts to really ramp up over 80.
Yeah, and it hasn't been hard on children either. It's
children almost don't even.
Yeah.
So we'll see. You know, I hope it goes. I hope it goes away, and
they'll figure it out. Lose. I have faith. And you know, one thing for certain is my wife's going to be in a bubble until the whole thing blows over, because she's type 1 diabetic. Katie's just going to have to live in a bubble for a little while.
Well, they just announced, I mean, they're shutting restaurants and bars down. And
yeah, which kind of puts a damper in our lifestyle, doesn't it?
Yeah, playing live.
That's our whole thing, man, is going to restaurant every meal.
Facebook Live.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to be on Facebook Live. You're going to see quite a bit of us while everybody's stuck at home.
How much time we got?
We're good, man. That was an interesting podcast. It really was.
I enjoyed that. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Me too. Well, till next time.
We'll see you next time.
Peace, everybody.